Hello and welcome everybody. Thank you for joining. My name is Alessia Oliveri and I am a lead portfolio manager here at NCC Group, people-powered, technology-enabled cybersecurity services provider. As a brief background of NCC, we cover the full life cycle of cyber, from incident response to technical security testing, consulting through to implementation and managed detection and response solutions. And we do that across a global scale. In terms of my simple role here, it's to help make our technical assurance services accessible to our clients by aligning them with key themes and challenges which we see of most importance. Now, we have across this section brilliant panel discussion, and we're joined by three of our key experts within the business. We're going to highlight on the following 4 key points. So focusing on why traditional security falls short, how continuous offensive security closes the gap from cost to value, and the business impacts after the session. Collectively here today, you've got myself as introduced. I will pass on now to Jacobo to do a quick introduction.
Thanks, Alessia. So I'm Jacobo Rose. I'm Global VP, Head of Technical Assurance Services for NCC Group. I've been in NCC for 13 years now, short time ago, and more than 15 in the cybersecurity industry. So yeah, happy to join you today and looking forward to discuss around continuous offensive security.
Brilliant, thank you, Jacobo. Duncan.
Nice to meet everybody. And my name is Duncan MacDonald. I'm the UK lead for Technical Assurance Services at NCC Group. I've been in information and cybersecurity for about the last 20 years. And I hold a fellowship from CISEC, and I'm a chartered cybersecurity manager. Been working in and around the space for within NCC Group for the last 5 years. And looking forward to getting into the discussion.
Brilliant, thank you, Duncan. And Don.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Donald Ward. I'm Principal Solutions Architect for NCC Group, specifically within the Global Professional Services. I have a background in managed services, service integrators, like Atos and so on, and I've been in this industry now for near enough 20 years.
Brilliant. Thank you all. As we dive into the start of our session, our clients are really at the heart of our business, and hearing their challenges firsthand around the security testing and assurance market has really set the scene for this webinar today and NCC Group's approach to the evolving and adapting market in response to these key concerns. So we're collectively drawing upon the expertise of our panel, and we'll reflect on some of the engagements we've worked on, some experiences that we've seen, and we'll bring that all to bear in today's panel session. To kick off, we have a selection of themes, and as mentioned here, we've highlighted a few of those key client challenges and key requirements. And so you'll notice throughout the session today, we'll be touching upon these 3 key areas around increasing revenues, maximizing security spend, and ensuring risk assurance and maturity. So with that, we'll kick off with our first question under the theme of why traditional security falls short. And to our panel, our opening question is, what are the biggest limitations of traditional periodic penetration testing in today's threat landscape? I'll come to you first, Jacobo, if that's okay, to kick us off.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Alessia. I think first of all, traditional pen testing usually gives you kind of exposure between each of the tests. So especially in modern world where modern development life cycles are much fast paced and with AI code assisted and so on, and obviously maturity of the business. Now those shifts, changes are actually faster, and therefore the annual or quarterly usual tests, cannot really cover you throughout that period. Also, we have like manual releases, hot fixes, and even config tweaks that often go live without any proper validation. That thing ultimately leaves you with some sort of like a clean bill of health for day one, but after a week, you're not really sure whether your environment is secure or not. Change to infrastructure as well. I think sometimes are overshot. It's not just code. It's actually, that can introduce vulnerabilities. And I think that's often missed in the pre testing, is more focus on the actual software development, sort of the software deployment, and ultimately it leaves you in a compliant but exposed situation, kind of like you tick that box in your annual or biannual compliance, but actually, you're not really, you're satisfying the regulator needs, but you're not really aligning with the business needs around how critical is your systems and how threats evolve. And so yeah, I think there's traditional penetration testing still has his values but I actually think continuous assurance is what really brings that next level of security with the current modern world. But I'm not sure whether Duncan or Don want to add to that.
Yeah, I think you're right. The reality here is the landscape's changed, and so when we get in new regulations coming down the line, with the adoption of concepts from Gartner, for example, continuous threat exposure management, certainly coming out in the wider industry, I think it's time to start perhaps reviewing what we're doing at the moment and trying to balance the risk versus reward in terms of actually implementing cybersecurity across the board, really. So, yeah, absolutely.
For me, kind of traditional point in time testing is really important, but it can in development life cycles, it can often be seen as a blocker. We often see projects waiting until the last minute to be tested before the projects are rolled out or deployed. And security testing can be seen as kind of an inhibitor or business blocker. And if issues are identified, they can be costly and kind of restrict the ability for businesses to be agile, and doesn't necessarily support this kind of secure by design or kind of ongoing security management life cycles, which are kind of key for keeping ourselves and our customers secure. It can also create kind of an M&S kind of scenario or culture inside an organization, because you can end up with a security team saying, hang on a minute, this isn't secure, and the development team saying, we've got to get this out. So for me, the kind of continuous offensive security is really about partly maintaining compliance, but also building kind of secure, resilient products to help protect kind of the customer and make sure that as issues are being identified, they're being fixed and patched and resolved really, really quickly. And kind of an integrated testing regime really helps to secure products throughout their life cycle and their development. And the issues are fixed as they arise, rather than waiting for 6, 9, 12 months, and whatever the kind of cadence of kind of original testing would be. And helps to build in security principles from the ground up, and also help to train the people that are building and developing these products.
That brings us really nicely onto the next theme of around how does continuous offensive security close the gap. And I think it's prime time to really talk around continuous in practice and taking a look at the key outcomes and benefits of that. Would you be able to delve in a little bit further on some of the points that you've already made? We'll kick off with Don on this one. That's okay.
Yeah, I think the reality here is we need to stop the dwell time or the exposure time that's open to the business, and you can only really do that by reassessing your environment as often as possible. But I think we need to tailor that, along with just making sure the scope is correct, okay, and making sure you're prioritizing the critical assets, the critical services of your business, and focusing on what the actual reality of the threat is, you're exposed to, for example. And I think, with the likes of C10 coming into the main now, I think continuous offensive security is going to have to append to that process as part of the validation, and certainly part of the discovery phases of C10. So I think it's a great place to start, and it will close the gap. It will certainly highlight a risk, and also it will allow you to prioritize the resources that you, let's be honest, going to be constrained by in terms of budgets. Okay, it's reallocation of your resources to the right place at the right time.
Brilliant. Jacobo, how can you add to that?
Yeah, no, I think Dom's point were, right on the spot. I think, ultimately, what we're trying to do here is having that almost always on visibility of, the threats and your risks. And I think that's what continuous offensive security is about making sure that you're constantly detecting, potential risk and making sure that you react to those. So it's not just a testing time, but actually constantly reviewing your security posture. I think it ultimately leads to a faster remediation, which obviously has a business impact, making sure that you attack immediately those challenges, those vulnerabilities, and you fix them for reducing your window of exposure. And in a way, you're being proactive about that risk reduction rather than reactive, which is very often what happens in many of the point-in-time tests. So ultimately, again, it's that benefit around reducing your window of exposure, which can translate in many ways. I think there's some benefits as well around how that cross predictability, how you move from that capex cost where that point in time test can be to that more consistent monthly OPEX, which can bring some long-term savings and help you as well drive security posture in a better way for your business. Ultimately, it gives you to be in a better position and posture when the time comes for the actual compliance and audit readiness, right? It gives you a better position with the regulators and any other stakeholders that you engage with, showing your true maturity around security and showing them that it's actually security is part of your model and the way that you live of some sort. And I think, that integration, especially nowadays with, all that work that's going around DevSecOps and how they embed within the life cycle of development, how you embed within that the testing required, and you ultimately accelerate the secure development, and without actually slowing delivery. So I think it's a must needed in nowadays world where everything has to be fast paced.
Brilliant, thank you for that. And Duncan, from your perspective, what does it look like?
For me, this is all about risk management. So this is all about helping to kind of drive the adoption or the importance of understanding that shortening the time to identify risks and vulnerabilities in any system is absolutely paramount in the modern world, and demonstrating to clients that you've got kind of a level of active protection going on is really, really important. For me, this is about moving to kind of that risk-based approach. So we're not just focused on testing for the sake of testing. We're focused on testing and identifying the things that are important to us and important to our business, and then focusing the effort on fixing those vulnerabilities and issues where they pose the biggest risk to our organisation or our clients. Kind of key point here is to kind of demonstrate the kind of active protection. And as suppliers of products and services, we all see ever increasing emphasis on supply chains. So I think the kind of continuous testing or continuous risk management of systems and products is really, really important, and helps to demonstrate to those clients or our clients or that consume our services and products that there is active kind of defense going on in the background, and that we take security really seriously, and we can demonstrate that and provide evidence that we are doing all the right things to make sure that we're kind of mitigating risks as they come up, and also helping to kind of reduce the kind of manual effort. So, for example, we often see when people are operating on a periodic testing space that it takes a huge amount of effort from the internal teams to deal with kind of scoping, scheduling, hand-holding the teams through while they're doing the testing. And actually, with a kind of continuous model, we end up seeing a kind of a reduction of effort over time, because the teams become embedded. They start to kind of create a culture between them where security is embedded and it's thought about at every point. And we end up with the kind of uptick of activity when these services start to be consumed. But then over time, it just becomes BAU, and the effort is reduced in terms of the amount of kind of support needed by the internal teams, which helps them to kind of get on and go and focus on the things which are really important to them, like making money and paying the bills and keeping their organisations moving forward.
Yeah, top tips there. They are truly very important. In terms of the next approach of how our listeners and our audience here today can kind of help work through or quantify that business impact and essentially transition from cost to value. How can we support our listeners in transitioning that narrative of security as a cost into value to then show the business impact of continuous security? I'll come to Don first, if that's okay, because I feel like you've got a real nice overview from your experience that you've touched upon previously.
Yeah, thank you. I think the reality here is, I think Duncan's covered it slightly already, actually, is the fact that, if you want to show value, you need a baseline. But what does that baseline look like? Is that through metrics? Okay, for example, your mean time to discover, mean time to respond, etc., like that. So, and these 100% right, it's all down to the risk. Okay, so the risk has certain values in there, and you need to find what that is first. So you want to try and provide continuous offensive security, but you have to justify it somehow, right? And you're never really going to be able to justify that unless you've got these metrics. So, what's the cost of doing your traditional pen testing at the moment? How long is that taking for you to do? Is your delivery life cycle in terms of release management delayed because of the traditional form of pen testing? All these sort of metrics will all boil into a nice little bucket, and you'll get a good flavor there, really. Okay, to take a business case to your board. I mean, one of the things that I would certainly look at would be along the lines of mean time to discover and mean time to respond. But I think those two metrics alone actually will sort you out. Okay, and being able to prove that you've reduced those and therefore the risk and vulnerability as well.
Brilliant, thank you. And Kobo, can you add to that, please?
Yeah, well, I think so. Dom touched on a very important point. I think that visual reduction, right? I think there's a very strong and compelling story versus point-in-time testing. When you look at the printing out your whatever risk metrics you're using, whether it's prevent breaches or regulatory fines or operational downtime, I think there's ultimately a very strong story between that continuous run approach, where you're constantly making sure that you tackle those risks as soon as possible and reducing that exposure versus the windows that you leave open with traditional point-in-time testing. So obviously, there's definitely like some direct link to cost effectiveness there and value. And looking at potential cost saving as well. Well, I think and Duncan touched on it beforehand, right? You're freeing staff, for to focus in other areas, whether it's like more innovation and focus in other areas, and actually you're improving the overall development efficiency, which allows you to like release faster, making sure that your product, your assets are deployed in the outward in a more safely way, which also can translate into better view from the market in general, right? I think as well that there is some inherent value in showing maturity around security, which sometimes is missed, right? Like, and nowadays being supply chain trust such a hot topic, right? I think that showing that maturity around being proactively embracing continuous assurance and security tells a strong story to your partners or your providers if you're working with any, and actually enhances your reliability in a way by making you more attractive to just client customers and other partners. So I think there are many good stories that you can tackle from around what this proactive approach to security, which is what ultimately continuous assurance is. Duncan, any thoughts on your side?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a number of different prisms to look at this through in terms of kind of demonstrating the business value. I think at a top level in the kind of XCOM space and the kind of senior business leaders space is all about risk reduction, like I touched on previously, but also it's around kind of quantification and understanding of risk and helping the organization to kind of continually to know and have some level of assurance that they're developing great products, but they're also kind of have a great view of how security impacts and how security is embedded throughout the life cycle of their development. And then the second prism really is the kind of impact on the development function, as you touched on, really around kind of making sure that they're doing the things that are important to them, but doing it in a secure way, so that they can have that level of assurance that things that whatever product it is that they're making has the right kind of core foundations from a security perspective. So it feels like there's a couple of different ways to look at it, and you can probably articulate and put some numbers around each one.
Perfect, thank you. And I think it's probably a perfect opportunity to just answer, look at one of the key questions that's come through. So what advice would you give to organizations just starting their journey towards continuous offensive security? In terms of summing up, I suppose, point from each of you here on that early bit. I appreciate we are going to touch upon advice a little bit later on. Just to sum up your key points. Question. Duncan, start with you if that's okay.
So kind of key advice would be to understand where this fits into the development lifecycle and which teams this fits into. So I'll touch on this in one of the later questions, but kind of making sure that the teams are brought along the journey so that they understand why you're building in continuous testing is so important. So they need to be fully bought into the approach that you're trying to build, because if they're not, then it will never get off the ground. So being really, really sure and making sure that everyone is brought in and comes on the journey for why this is happening is so important.
Brilliant. I am conscious this feeds us perfectly into our next section around advice from our experts. So truthfully on this, we'll come back to you each individually to talk through your most important piece of advice to support our listeners in their journey. And I think that question really framed it very, very nicely towards continuous security. And if we could delve into the core details of that and come back to some of our live questions, I will pass back to the panel for their pieces of advice. Okay, Bob, we'll start with you.
Yeah, sure. So my advice would be to start small, to make sure that you start automating what you can, that you start to integrate security in your core processes from the beginning. Right? It's about, first of all, understanding what is your current security posture, identify what are your critical assets, where you need to deploy the right level of security. Then you start to use that automation and that integration of security and make those security checks into your development points and operation workflows, where where it's going to have the most impact. But you need to do that in a way that security becomes almost like a seamless part of your daily work, kind of. Because otherwise, it's gonna become a barrier in your development and your day-to-day and your business as usual. So it's important that it is truly embedded within your ways of working of some sort. I think it's important as well to build a culture where security is shared responsibility. And I know this is not a new thing, but it still remains, right. It's everyone's problem, really, not just part of a small separate team that sometimes struggles. So we need to make sure that we embrace that and we evangelize security across all teams that are related to, especially the development and employment. And I guess making sure that you continuously measure, you monitor, you refine your approach, and you make sure that whatever controls you introduce or measures or changes security posture, you make sure that they are the right ones, that they are having the positive impact that you want. But also to make sure that they keep you pace with those evolving threats and business needs and how the market's changing in general. But yeah, I think summarizing is start small but steady, right? Build slowly, have control over it, and make sure that you embed security within your actual workflows and processes.
Brilliant, thank you. And Don, we'll come to you next for your pieces of advice.
Thank you. I think some of my fund has already been stolen, but no, I have to agree. I think scope is a key factor here, because you don't want to go big bang across the entire organisation. Certainly not in terms of your resources. So I think absolutely scope it right. Make sure it's specific to your critical assets and the things that matter to you most. If that goes well, and you have additional budget, then perhaps scale it up a bit. But the other thing I was thinking around is just keep an eye on the horizon, because, as I mentioned already, CTEM is a concept out there from Gartner. I would dare say that the value of that probably will be incorporated into some legislation and perhaps some industry best practice in the future. And if you are going to adhere to that best practice, be it NIST, ISO, whatever the case may be, you will need an element of continuous offensive security in there to comply, not so much as comply, but to achieve their vision, that side of things. The other thing I had to think about was around context, just keeping an eye on the context of the business. Regulations are thing, the market's changed, so does the technology. You may start changing your risk profile and your risk tolerance. Okay, and if that gets to a stage where you actually do need to start continuous offensive security, that's the time to change.
Brilliant, thank you. And Duncan, can you cap us on your piece of advice?
Yeah, sure. So I suppose there's a second prism to look through, as well as kind of bringing the teams on the journey, is really around kind of getting buy-in from the senior leaders for the investment in this type of solution. From a kind of whole organisation or whole society perspective, this is about trying to make sure that you've got strong security controls in place and that your products and services are built in the right way. So kind of bringing everyone on a journey is really important. But then also understanding the benefits and making sure you're monitoring those benefits and you're tracking the kind of improvements over time to make sure you're kind of keeping score. And really kind of pulling everyone in the right direction. And as the other chaps have said, really start small and then build out and grow over time. And these types of solutions will help your organisations to kind of really give the assurance to your clients that they're doing absolutely everything they can to protect them.
Brilliant. And I think this is probably a perfect opportunity to bring in one of our live questions submitted from our audience around advice. I'll open this to each of you. Please jump in with your answer. So the question is, what advice would you give for developers changing a monolithic application, which is normally difficult to release to test during development? I'll open that to the floor.
I think, referencing back to the point that I was trying to make before, I think it's important that you focus your efforts. You focus on that critical features, and you prioritize your high risk areas, and you start to slowly but steadily integrate security into the development steps. Obviously, monolithic applications can be quite a challenge, but you have to start somewhere, right? It's probably a balance between automated and manual pen testing and all that, because of the very nature of the monolithic application. But I think if you start from small and you're slow but steady build on top of that, you can get to that, right? Ultimately, it's the question of whether monolithic applications in nowadays world are much sustainable, especially on how things develop. That's how we approach it. Not being a developer myself, of course, just from a security perspective. Not sure if Dom or anyone has.
No, I mean, I kind of agree as well. I think it depends where you are in the software-defined lifecycle in that particular application, because if it is notoriously difficult and it's monolithic, perhaps maybe a change in the future, i.e. an upgrade or a complete transfer off that platform onto another one might be better suited, but only you as the owner of that monolithic application will know. But in terms of the security of that monolithic application, I guess some of the questions, and I hate to say it depends, but it does depend on what's the rate of change of the application, what's actually making the requirement to perform continuous offensive security against that. And some of those questions we can't answer now, but I guess something for you to think about is: do you really need to change? Do you really need to test it often enough? And is the squeeze worth the juice, basically?
I think from my perspective, I think I would kind of look at what you've got, and every single application, every single organization is going to be slightly different. So I think that would be a kind of a case in point where we would want to work very closely kind of with that kind of end organization to help them to define a methodology and an approach that worked for them. It would be remiss of us to come in and say we've got a one way of operating and that's the only way we're going to do it. I think we need to have some kind of defined conversations to work out what the objectives were, what the life cycle of the change life cycle of the applications were, and how we can then start to layer in these security controls on or the security gateway, kind of a slow and steady process to help to make sure that we help you meet your goals, but also we can provide the level of assurance you need as well.
Brilliant. Thank you. That's a great answer. We've got a collective answer there. Thank you to our panel. That is our panel session complete. Right, we will jump on to the theme of supply chain trust. So there's a couple of questions here around supply chains. Again, I'll run it in a similar way, jump in on the panel responses. So to kick us off, how does continuous security support supply chain trust? I'll open that to the floor there.
I'm happy to take that one first. So from my perspective, it's absolutely paramount, right, that organizations who supply software and hardware products are making sure that there are the right levels of security controls in place. If you look across, a load of the breaches over the last 12, 18, 24 months, a lot of them are all linked to supply chain being one of the weakest links. So as an organization that consumes lots of services and products, the one thing they're going to be doing lots of in the future, if they're not doing it already, is assuring their supply chain and making sure that their supply chain are as secure as they need them to be. So I personally believe that this is a great way for organizations to start being able to demonstrate that they have the right controls and governance in place around the products that they're assuring and building and selling. And it helps them to demonstrate this in the right way. So when they're audited or when they get the questions, it can help be a kind of a business enabler for them, because they'll be able to demonstrate that their security controls are better than kind of their competition.
Yeah, I agree, Duncan. And I think just to add to that, really, and I might be able to answer some of Aaron's question as well, really, is look, NIS2 and DORA. Okay, I'm starting to see a lot of communications with managed services providers, for example, who are being asked to provide more and more assurances as part of the supply chain. And I think, if you are an organization which is loosely or even directly incorporated into DORA under the scope, then these are the sort of questions that you're going to be asked more and more to do. So providing that evidence for continuous offensive security, God forbid if there was a breach, we'll stand you in a better stead. Say, look, you've done all due diligence and due care when providing your service overall. So I think, yes, culturally it's acceptable, but also I think reality here is you may be required to do so anyway as a result of NIS2 or DORA or any other legislation that mandates supply chain management.
I think on top of what Don was saying, I think obviously directives and regulations are driving this as well, but not just from that perspective. I think even from the private sector itself, we're seeing more and more companies coming us to review the security of their supply chain, and obviously organizations are looking for partners that demonstrate actually proactive and continuous security practices, not just like really checks. So conscious of how the threats evolve rapidly in the world that we live. It has become a critical thing, supply chain. So I think I like the term agile security, but in this context, I guess. So yeah, I do fully agree that there's a need, a constant noise for more ongoing assurance, for more partners that are more secure and actually demonstrate that security that security posture, not just in word, but actually in acts. And I think this is one step forward towards supporting our clients and customers achieve that.
Brilliant. Thank you all. Moving on from supply chain into AI, we've had a question around how is AI being used to assist with offensive security functions? And this is a very prevalent theme at the moment, isn't it? So I'll open it all up to you again.
It's a very, very open question, I'll say.
Yeah.
I'll try to keep it within a very small time frame. I'll say, like, from a general offensive security, obviously, as any other area or market or expertise, we're trying to embrace AI within certain guardrails and controls, obviously making sure that we make the right use of it. We don't think it's a substitute per se. That there's a lot of value that is brought out of the human expertise on top of it, but ultimately it can help you facilitate and automate and obviously streamline certain actions. So as a business entity, we're embracing AI on the way that we deliver our services, to making sure that we bring on top of that the value of our human expertise built over like more than 25 years. In terms of specifically continuous assurance, obviously is a key element to make sure that we are as agile and fast as possible to help the decision making with automating and streamlining some of the actions so we can respond quickly to our client requirements. So I would say it's a critical element, but obviously one that we make sure that we take with the right controls. As a security company, we're aware of the benefits and the risks as well of AI and language models. So we do it with caution, but obviously we embrace it as well.
I think the reality is that AI is going to have to be a part of this equation, right? Because the automation piece, right? I mean, AI. If you have the context of an organization already inserted into AI, and you have some tooling over the top of that, specifically around AI as well, if you put a condition in there and you ask your AI to say, look, is the time right to conduct a security test? And if AI determines the risk profile, exposure, etc., or any metrics that you put in there, and a threshold is breached, execute a test, for example, that can all be automated. And again, it's just reducing that amount of manual planning and testing, okay, by using AI tooling, for example. And I think that's probably a great way to leverage AI for continuous offensive security. Definitely.
Duncan, anything to cap us off on the AI front there?
Yeah, I mean, I think the chaps have made some great points. I think with anything that's new and got a lot of hype behind it, I think people should start small and get to the point where they trust what the AI is doing, and then start to build from there. There's a lot of hype and a lot of fear, uncertainty, and doubt around AI. So there's a long way to go before it's the silver bullet for everything.
The only thing I'll add at the end is I think it's inevitable in a way, right, that we embrace AI in all aspects of life almost. So there is a learning curve on these from as providers, as customers, as clients, and we need to understand and make sure that we do that within the right framework to make sure that it's secure, it's safe, and actually we keep control over it and it delivers as we want it. But I think it's something that is inevitable that we all embrace, and for the good, right, for the value that can bring to all of us. And by all means, security will not lag behind that. In fact, we're going to try to do it at the forefront almost.
Yeah, absolutely. Embedding that security right at the beginning, especially with any emerging technologies coming through. Perfect. We've gone through quite a few of the questions in the chat, and that's a brilliant opportunity now for us to take the next 10 minutes or so to just give you a little bit of insight into the terminology that you've heard here today around continuous offensive security and what does that mean from an NCC Group perspective. I'd just like to thank our panel first for their compelling insights into the current AppSec market. What you're seeing on screen now is a light touch overview of how NCC Group has put these market insights, expertise, and knowledge to solve the client challenges that we've spoken through here today. And we've developed a solution under the headline of continuous offensive security. Now, that offering is essentially bolstered by these 4 key points that you're seeing here. And it's a people-powered and technology-enabled solution, delivering a scalable and hybrid testing solution with that deep technical expertise. And it's enabled by leading technologies with our brilliant vendor and partner ecosystem. We're really focused on accelerated secure development and having that as an integrated testing approach in line with the Agile development cycles for faster, safer release cycles, aligning testing with live development changes. And again, I think it links into that point around agile security coming through, and some of those points mentioned around the supply chain Q&A function there as well. Thirdly, the view of continuous risk visibility and essentially continuously identifying and addressing vulnerabilities before they can be exploited to lower exposure to financial, reputational and or operational risk, enabling informed, timely decision making and really for that proactive defence. And finally, we've spoken around this throughout this session, really, talking around cost into value, talking around how do we transition from a unpredictable spend into something which is a monthly and consistent operational expenditure model. And essentially that is with a managed service term. So focusing on simplified budgeting, test processing and supporting innovation without the concern or the increasing risk of cost spikes as you go through your agile development cycles. That's a very, very brief overview of what our continuous offensive security offering is. Please do reach out to find out a little bit more about the service. We'll follow up with some core information for you all afterwards. But to move on to some of our key takeaways now and to cap off this session, we've spoken around quite a lot of different things today, but as key takeaways, I want you to leave with these four insights. So traditional testing leaves some gaps. We understand and heard from our panel here today that periodic testing cannot necessarily keep pace with that rapid development, and there's a core focus on compliance and not necessarily real security as changes are happening in environments. And I think that leads us perfectly into how continuous offensive security builds that resilience. It's real-time risk monitoring and automation to cut that risk level down and to save on resources. I think we all see that security fits very nicely into agile delivery. Thirdly, focusing on security as a strategic enabler on this transition from compliance to proactive defense, security does drive that collaboration and predictable costs. And then lastly, we really highlighted on this clear business value. So continuous offensive security is there to reduce that breach risk and cost, and it strengthens that trust across the supply chain. So thank you so much for joining us here today. I hope you've enjoyed the session, and we'll call it there. Bye for now.